Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Good to see you. Let's see if this all works. So I have got 10 minutes to share with you my one great idea, which is why systems change for sustainability is the most important thing we need to understand today. So first of all, let's deal with the systems change word soup. We hear the word system, systemic change, systems change a lot at the moment, but we all have slightly different understandings of what we mean by that terminology. And so first up, I wanted to describe what we mean by a system. And it's a set of things connected by a web of relationships. And the emphasis moves from the individual parts of a system to the way in which the system is connected. A system can be big. It could be the global economy. It could be small. It could be this room. It could be an ecosystem, like the marine ecosystem. It could be a social structure, such as education. The boundary of the system depends upon the problem we're trying to solve. Systemic change, or systems change, is the emergence of a new system, emergence of a new way of operating, a new pattern of doing things. At this point, you might be wondering, why does she have a picture of a beetle on her slide? Let me tell you, there's a story behind this beetle. This is a heather beetle, Lochmea suturalis, if you were interested, and it's having a good old nibble on a piece of heather. The heather beetle, heather, are part of a heathland ecosystem, low-lying ecosystems found a lot in Europe. And these ecosystems were really prevalent until a couple of decades ago. But then in the 1990s, they started to rapidly transition to grassland. Bear with me, there's a reason for this story. Enter a young scientist, really young, clearly, it's the 1990s, with a PhD, trying to understand why was the heather disappearing. And in actual fact, what was happening was that ammonia emissions from pig farms were going up into the atmosphere, causing rain to fall on the heathlands that was very rich in nitrogen, which was a delight for the heather beetles. Super tasty heather ensued, and the heather beetle was wiping out the heather. And so that system was beginning to transition into grasslands. And through my PhD and work of others, we got to the root cause of that change, and it was the ammonia emissions from the pig farm. And so that's an example of how understanding a system helps you get to the root cause of what's driving a change in the system, and helps us then ask a really important question. If systems are changing the whole time, how can we harness that energy to drive systems change for sustainability? And why do we want to do that? Well, very simply, and you all know this, we are not on a course to deliver the SDGs. We're a long way from that. And there are two further reasons. The challenges that we face are urgent and complex. Yes, this is a picture of a snail. Who knew you were going to have a talk about insects and flora and fauna today? The reason I'm sharing this is that I could have showed you a quote from the IPCC report telling us how urgent climate change is, and we know that urgency. But actually, this is George. He is a Hawaiian land snail, and he was the first animal to become extinct this year on January the 1st. That is also the urgency of the challenge. And just last week, the first mammal became extinct, and it's only February. These challenges are also interconnected and complicated. So I hear you say, yeah, okay, we get all that, but there's great stuff happening with sustainability. We're all here, thousands of us, committed to driving sustainable development. Yes, we are making progress, but it's not fast enough. And also, we tend to put sticking plaster on problems. This is a tea plantation, and this is a story through one of our projects, Tea 2030, a collaboration looking to make sustainable tea the mainstream, where we have created a project to try and understand what will it take to transform the tea industry so that it becomes sustainable. Typically in the tea industry, as with many commodities, money goes into improving living conditions, really important, improving the living wage. But that's not going to the root cause of the unsustainability in the system. In the case of tea, the root cause of the unsustainability is the way that the market functions. Tea is often auctioned, which means oversupply, price drops, producer doesn't get the price of production, and poverty ensues. And that's why in Tea 2030, we have a project funded by the UK government looking at an alternative market mechanism for tea, which goes to the root cause of the problem, and if it works, will drive greater value capture for the producer, will allow a more sustainable livelihood. So let's try and make this real. How do we then design for system change for sustainability? As with most things in life, there are 3 steps. And I'm going to use the story of another of our collaborations, Cotton 2040, to try and illustrate these 3 steps. The first is to diagnose the system around us. Really understand what are those root causes that are driving the unsustainability. This is where we often use Forum for the Future tools, looking at scenarios, for example. And the reason we started working cotton, it's a fiber that 30% of total fabric production in the world, is responsible for the livelihoods of 350,000 farmers, and yet conventional cotton, 350 million, conventional cotton is associated with huge negative environmental and social impact. So Cotton 2040 is designed to try and mainstream sustainable cotton. And the diagnosis of the cotton system tells us there are 2 really important leverage points. Creating demand for sustainable cotton. A lot of sustainable cotton is produced, but we're just not buying it. And aligning the standards that certify cotton. There are over 20 of them. They speak a different language to the producers. So the other systemic leverage point is traceability and an alignment therein of the cotton standards. So then we create the pioneering practice. We try and experiment in addressing these root causes. So we've created a guide for sourcing sustainable cotton so that we can draw demand for cotton into the global economy. And we've also, with the great support and help of the certification bodies in cotton, we have an MOU for the very first time between all of the standards, trying to get them to work together to align on impact measurement, align on language, which will make it far easier for farmers to convert to sustainable cotton. Once we have the pioneering practice, we then need to scale. And our Cotton Up guide, for example, has been translated not into just German, which is very exciting, but Japanese. So in other words, once we find something that works, that starts to shift the system, we need to scale that. This is also relevant for individual organizations. It's not possible to have a sustainable business in an unsustainable system. So for all businesses, we also need to diagnose the system around us, understand where are those systemic leverage points. So if you're a food business, it probably isn't your logistics function. It's understanding in that world around you, what are the interventions you can make in your food supply chains to make them more resilient? If you're a CPG company, it isn't, I'm afraid, incremental improvements in packaging that will drive the system change. It's actually understanding what can you do to drive the transformation of the economy so that it becomes circular. So these steps apply equally to individual organizations. And the need for individual organizations to transform the system around them is why we've created 4 principles which are around being net positive. So net positive, putting more back into environment and society than we take out, really important if we're going to deliver the SDGs. And it's about moving from just doing less bad. So those 4 principles are about materiality, really focusing on those areas where you can make the biggest difference, transparency, admitting you don't have all the answers because none of us do, being systemic, looking at the world around you, understanding where those leverage points are, and then also being restorative, putting more back than we can take out. So that is the why and a bit of the how of systems change. What is it that we can all do differently? And I'd like you to leave you with 2 things we can all do differently and 2 questions to ask. Are we locking in an existing unsustainable system, are we perpetuating the unsustainability of that system, or are we allowing the emergence of a new pattern? It's much easier to perpetuate an unsustainable system, to just take incrementalism and move that forward a little bit. But actually what we should all be doing is designing for a new operating system, a new way of doing things. And then finally, are we designing for transformational change? And by transformational change, I mean catalytic change, change that creates greater ripples of change as you go forward. going back to T, if we can prove there is a different market mechanism, then that will have a catalytic positive impact on the entire sector. I'm out of time, but I did want to leave you with 3 things that I've learned, because this has been quite a personal journey for me, which is why I showed you the picture of the heather beetle, because for me, that's where it all started. And the 3 things I'd like to leave you with and to reflect upon is, number 1, the closer you get to changing a system, the harder it pushes back. So we all need to be incredibly resilient. Number 2, the future is not something that just happens to us. It's something that we can create. Number 3, change starts with us all. We need to change our mindsets. We need to change our perspectives. We need to get better at designing for systemic change. Because if we all become brilliant at driving system change for sustainability, then we will deliver a sustainable future. Thank you.